Congregation, we could turn our Bibles again to Romans chapter 14. I'd like to read verse 1 and then turn to chapter 15 and read verse 7. Romans 14, verse 1, and then Romans 15, verse 7. Receive one who is weak in the faith, but not to disputes over doubtful things. And then chapter 15, verse 7, notice this is the bookend of that section. Therefore, receive one another, just as Christ also received us, to the glory of God. Congregation, when the Apostle Paul picked up his pen to write to the Romans, under the inspiration of the Spirit, he had huge aspirations. Paul's goal was to travel through Rome all the way to Spain to bring the gospel of Jesus Christ there. This is what he longs to do. This is what he's driven for. In chapter 15, if you read on, you notice he's describing, he's preached the gospel faithfully wherever he's gone, and yet there's this destination, this final destination he wants to go. He wants to bring the gospel to Spain. And a key church then on that route to Spain is Rome, the church in Rome. If Paul is going to have the funds and the support, the prayer support to get there, he needs this church behind him. And so he says that, Romans 15, verse 24, we hear his desire. He says, whenever I journey to Spain, he doesn't know when it's going to happen, but when I do, I shall come to you. I'm going to stop and visit you, for I hope to see you on my journey and to be helped on my way there by you. And so Romans, this epistle, is Paul's missionary support letter. He's the missionary. He's writing to the church, asking for their support. He wants his love and his zeal for Christ to be contagious, to catch fire among this church family. And so in order to make that happen, he spends a lot of time in this letter, as you know, dealing with big truths, with beautiful doctrines. First, he begins by starting with the devastating truth of our spiritual death in Adam. There he lays it out patiently, slowly, showing us, leading us to a point to say that there's no hope in ourselves. And then there in chapter 3, you have that turning point where Paul brings forth God's remedy in Jesus Christ to our greatest problem. He speaks there of justification, how to be declared righteous, though a sinner, declared righteous by God. And then he speaks of sanctification, how God doesn't leave us, but he gives his Spirit. He transforms us and empowers us to live for his glory. He speaks of adoption. We have the Spirit of adoption, whereby we cry out, Abba, Father. Oh, see the privileges, he's saying, of being the people of God. He speaks of glorification. Those whom God has justified, he shall also glorify. And so Paul has spent a lot of time dealing with these important things. We need to have the gospel right if we want to be of good use in the kingdom of God. That's Paul's point. Saying, if you are going to help me, if you're going to support me, you need to know the gospel. And then we come to chapter 14 and 15, and surprisingly, Paul spends a lot of time dealing with little things. Little things comparatively. These little arguments that are way smaller than the massive eternal truths of salvation in Christ. Little things like food and drink and celebrating religious holidays. Little things. He spends a fair bit of time, notice, a chapter and a half just dealing with these little things. And that's somewhat surprising. Why does Paul spend so much time dealing with what we might think are minor things? And here's the reason. It's because the little things can cause big problems. Little things can cause big problems. The big things, they separate the church from the world. The little things seem to separate a brother from a brother and a sister from a sister. And so Paul needs to deal with these things, these matters of adiaphora, we might say, things that are peripheral. They're not of the essence of the gospel. They're maybe third rank in importance. They're on the fringes. They do matter, and yet they're not of the essence. These things have the tendency to tear apart God's people. Paul saw that in the church of Rome, and so he's looking at the church, and he's saying, if this church is going to be useful in the kingdom of God, then this church needs to learn how to love one another while differing in opinion on these things. Not on the gospel, but on these other things. If they're going to support Paul in his mission, then they need to stand united behind him. And if they're going to stand united behind him, then they need to know how to deal with these little things. So it's important. And it's the case for every church. Every church, no matter where it is, throughout church history, Romans 14 has been applicable. This passage was applicable to us prior to our present circumstances. We needed to know how to deal with things we disagree on. And yet our present circumstances have just brought that more to the fore. And so, congregation, we desperately need to know how to disagree with one another in love. We need to know how to care for one another. And this morning, I don't pretend to come with all the answers to these questions, but I do come to you with the Word of God. And we must all recognize that God is speaking to us in this Word, so that we might all come to the Word and mine it. Because God is speaking in His infallible, inerrant Word, and He speaks to our situation as well. And so as we listen this morning and in future weeks, I urge you to listen recognizing that you need to hear this. What I mean is, if we leave this sermon and future ones saying, they really needed to hear that, go home and listen again. Because I need to hear this. You need to hear this. God is speaking to you, each of us as individuals. And so as I come to the outset, I need to say, Lord, you're speaking to me. Help me to hear what I need to hear. And let others hear what they need to hear. That goes a long way. So pray that the Spirit might illuminate His Word to our hearts. Well, the title of this series is Learning How to Love Those We Disagree With, and the title of this message is Welcome One Another. Welcome one another. 3 points. First, receive one another. Second, resist destructive vices. And third, remember God's embrace. Welcome one another. First of all, receive one another. Now, as we come to Romans 14, it's important for us to notice Paul's tone as he's writing. Here Paul is, and he's writing in a tender voice, as it were. It's very different than if you turn to Galatians, for example. If you go to Galatians, you find an angry apostle. Paul is writing short, hard sentences, and he's dealing with what we might say are little things. Circumcision, days, celebrating certain days. And yet, in that instance, Paul is on fire. He's angry. Foolish Galatians. And yet here, you don't find any of that. He's tender. What's the difference between this situation and that one, though they look the same on the surface? Well, in Galatians, there were people teaching that you need these little things if you're going to be accepted by God. You need these little things to be justified in God's sight. And that's not the case in Rome, and I don't believe that's the case here. I don't think anyone here is saying, you need to think what I think in order to have a right standing with God. And so notice Paul can then speak tenderly to the church and not in anger. And yet, as Paul writes to the church, it's clear that there is a conflict. There are, you might say, two parties, two factions. There is us and there is them. He calls them the weak and the strong. There's these two sides. Well, who are the weak and the strong? Was it Jews and Gentiles? Was it Christians who thought they couldn't eat meat because the meat was being offered to idols? Was that the problem? Well, Paul doesn't actually tell us in Romans. In 1 Corinthians chapter 8, another important passage that deals with this, the issue there is offering of meat to idols. Some Christians saying we can eat the meat, others saying they couldn't. In Romans, Paul doesn't tell us anything about idols. He doesn't tell us what the circumstances are, why some are abstaining and why some are eating. But he does tell us what we need to know. Verse 2, he tells us that the issue was, for one believes he may eat all things, that's the strong, but he who is weak eats only vegetables. And so the strong, they believe that they can eat meat and that they can drink wine and that they can enjoy these good gifts of God out of thankfulness to God. They were living in that liberty. And then there were the weak, and they believed that they needed to abstain from these things. We don't know why, but they needed to abstain from these things for some important reasons in order to honor God. And they were committed to that. Now, it might seem petty to us, but it was real. It was a real conflict. It was threatening the health of this church. It was tearing them apart over these little things, united on the big things. And yet these things were causing them to get entrenched in their stance, and the gap was widening. Now, to clarify, when Paul says weak in faith, he doesn't necessarily mean an immature Christian. He doesn't mean one who has no faith in Christ. These are sincere believers. These are those who love the Lord. And by this phrase, Paul means a Christian whose conscience hasn't fully embraced the full liberty that Christ has won for them. That's what he means when he's speaking about this faith. So now, a conscience is that inner voice that God has given to us, that inner policeman, as it were, that's meant to guide us on our journey through this world, helping us to live pleasing to the Lord. And so Paul is saying that there are some Christians whose inner policemen were speaking loudly over matters where God was not concerned. And then there are the strong, and by that he doesn't mean those who have a stronger faith per se, but those who have a better informed conscience by the Word of God. The Word of God has been shaping their conscience in a way to see that they have liberty at this point. Now, lest we start immediately placing ourselves in these categories, we need to realize that nobody's conscience is perfectly aligned to Scripture. Only Christ was. And so for all of us, at various points, we are the weak Christian, and in other circumstances, we are the strong Christian. Because our consciences haven't been completely shaped by the Word. We're still needing to be sanctified. And so there are points where we need to be recognizing the liberty that Christ has won. Well, with that introduction, let's see the command that God gives. He says, receive one another. And let's begin by noting the opposite. What's the opposite of receiving one another? Well, the opposite is rejecting one another, pushing others away. Brothers and sisters, pushing them away. And that's what Paul is seeing in this church in Rome. They're maybe not intentionally, but there's this drift happening. There's not a reception of them. There's this intentional or unintentional rejection. And that's the natural response. Children, you know that it takes maybe a long time to build something nice and very little time to tear it down. If you have a younger brother or sister, maybe you've just built a nice set of Lego, you've made your awesome castle, and it doesn't take very long. You spent hours building it, and it doesn't take very long for your younger sibling to come in there and smash it to pieces. And that's the case for us as well, relationally. To edify one another, to build up one another takes a long time, and to drift apart from one another, to reject one another, can happen quickly and easily. It can happen in various ways. It can happen through nasty comments. It can happen through cold shoulders or ignoring someone or just not thinking about someone. Again, it might not be intentional, and yet there can be a wedge. Maybe we think of a husband and wife where, let's say, the wife has a peanut allergy. The husband loves her dearly, and yet he keeps coming home with peanut butter cups, chocolate peanut butter cups. He loves her. She's allergic to peanuts. He's just not thinking about her. That's the problem, and she feels it. And so we can reject someone just not in intentional ways, but just by not thinking about them, considering their needs. And so it's easy. It's really easy to reject one another. And as we think then about our situation, and if we step back and we take a look at our cultural situation, the environment we're living in, where we're hearing the news maybe, we're hearing what politicians are saying, and what is the narrative? It's reject one another. Is it not that the unvaccinated and the vaccinated, they cannot belong together? Isn't there this pushing of rejection driving the wedge between varying consciences on a matter? That's the natural thing. And that's the opposite of what God wants. That tells us that what God is commanding us is something that's radical. It's difficult. To receive someone is hard when they have different opinions than me. It's hard work. And yet this is God's command to us today. It's not his suggestion, here's how things could work a little better, but it's his command. Receive one another. To his children, receive one another. Welcome them. And so, congregation, this is the main point that we need to leave with today. Receive one another. That's the word God wants us thinking about. Receive one another. How can I embrace the other? Receive. Have open arms. It means to accept, to embrace. Not that we accept them if they change their mind and become to my position. Not that we accept them when they start to think like I do. No, we accept them. We welcome them. We receive them without qualification, without footnotes. God is calling us this morning to believe that the gospel is strong enough to bridge the gap that the world says cannot be bridged. And wouldn't that be a beautiful thing? That if in one place, in one church, there can be a reception, a warm reception of what the world is saying is impossible. That two sides who differ can receive one another, can embrace one another and say the gospel really is bigger than these differences. And it's important to notice that Paul starts this way. Notice this is the first step in loving those we disagree with. It's important that Paul doesn't start with reason with one another. We'll get there. Reasoning needs to happen at some point. But the first thing, the great emphasis on where to begin is receive, welcome. Open your heart to the other side. Because if we don't, then nothing else good can follow. No reasoning, no understanding. We must start by receiving. Well, what does that look like? We want to flesh that out over the future weeks. And again, I don't have all the answers to this, but I do know that if we commit ourselves to receiving one another, good things will happen. Picture it like this. If you're in a counseling room, the marriage is strained, it's not going well. Both sides don't want to work together. It's them, it's them, it's them. There's little hope in that situation. But as soon as the counselor hears, I want to receive this person. I want to receive my spouse. I want to love them. I'm committed to loving them. that's when things start to move in the right direction. And God is saying that's the same case in a church family. Commit yourself. Drill into yourself, God wants me to receive my brother or sister. And I don't know what that looks like practically. I don't know what the next step is. But as I pray over this, as I open my heart and say, Lord, help me to receive them, doors start to open. The walls of our hearts start to smash down like the walls of Jericho, and a way becomes possible for the two sides to move closer. So let's make it our commitment to receive one another. Receive the one who is weak in the faith, but not to disputes over doubtful things. So again, receive them, but don't just receive them to have your argument. No, focus first on receiving them. Receiving them. Doesn't mean we have to agree. Doesn't mean we can't talk about the issues. We have to. But this first means we have to major on receiving the other side. Well, that's a tall order. How can we do this? Well, of course, only with the Spirit's help. And yet the Spirit gives us means. He uses means, and He requires us to put in effort. And that takes us to our second point, where here's the Spirit giving us direction. The only way we will receive one another is if we resist destructive vices. That's what God is telling us in the second point. Resist destructive vices. The Lord is saying, if we want good Christian peace in the church, then there must be war in my heart. I need to be doing battle with myself. I need to be engaged personally in this heart warfare, and each of us individually taking that responsibility on themselves, saying, I am going to fight the battle in here. That's where the battle needs to be fought most fiercely. And so this is a call to take up arms. God is calling you to fight, to strive, but not with each other, but with yourself. Deny yourself, take up the cross, and follow me. This is to fight, to scrap with our own sinful tendencies. Notice verse 3. Paul says, let not him who eats despise him who does not eat, and let not him who does not eat judge him who eats. And so Paul has words for both sides. Paul's not just telling one side, do this, and the other side, you're off scot-free. No, both sides have a responsibility. There are vices to avoid on both sides. The first destructive vice is that we must resist is despising one another. Notice he says that. Let not him who eats despise him who does not eat. Now, this word, it means to treat with contempt. It's to have an attitude of superiority. In this case, in Rome, those who were eating meat and drink, they were the strong. They were in the majority. There were more of them. And so it was easy for them, as you know, they're in the majority. It's easy. The natural tendency is to think, we've got this figured out. It's easy then, in that place of superiority, to look down on these weak Christians who just haven't figured out their freedoms yet. And to then not only to look down on them, but to start to say, just eat meat already. It's fine, eat meat. And when the weak are still struggling, to despise them. How can we have patience for people who just don't get it? That's despising. How can we put up with them any longer? Well, if we are despising someone, if you can notice that as you think back on this week, this month, this year, or in the week ahead, red lights should be flashing. That's what the Lord wants. Receive one another and resist despising. There is never a time where it's okay to despise our brother or sister. It's never right. And so as I see my heart moving to that place of despising the one, I need to stop. I need to repent. I need to confess that. I need to renounce that. Jesus says, love your enemies. Seek your enemy's greatest good. And I don't think anyone here would say that my enemy is sitting next to me. And yet we're to love our enemies, seek their greatest good. And when I'm despising someone, I am not seeking their greatest good. And the same is true of a brother or sister. So that's the first destructive vice. The second one is that we must resist judging one another. Judging one another. And let not him who does not eat judge him who eats. And so here in this case in Rome, this is the tendency of the weaker brother. They're abstaining from eating. They're living very strict, and they're following what they are seeing as their conviction very closely, and their temptation then is to judge. Now, Paul is probably here thinking of Matthew 7, verse 1, where Jesus says, "Judge not, that you be not judged, for with what judgment you judge, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you." That's one of the most misquoted verses in the Bible. People who need to be rightly judged love to say this verse. It's their favorite verse because it seems to give a get out of jail free card. You can't judge me ever or in any way. No, that's not what Jesus says, actually. If you read Matthew 7, Jesus commands us to make judgment calls. Same chapter, Matthew 7, verse 15, just a few verses later, verse 15, Jesus says, "Beware of false prophets who inwardly are ravenous wolves." How can I do that if I'm not allowed to judge anything ever? So Jesus isn't banning proper judgment, but Jesus is banning us from being judgmental. And even in the English language, we recognize there's a difference between judging something, evaluating something, critiquing something in a proper way, and being judgmental. To be judgmental, which Jesus and Paul are opposing here, means making quick judgments, making hasty judgments, jumping to fast conclusions. I know why they did this. I know their motives. They did this to me, and here's why they did it. I know it. It's hard for us to know our own motives, let alone get into someone else's heart and understand why they did something. And so we need to be careful to judge someone's motives, to jump quickly. Yes, we can look at the evidence, what happened, look at the facts, but that's about it. I can't see the heart. I can't see the motives. Those who are judgmental, they jump to quick decisions, but these decisions or judgments are excessively critical. Excessively critical. They're harsh. They're hypocritical because we would never judge ourselves by that standard. That's what Jesus is saying. We will be judged by a standard on the final day. But if we are judging others constantly to a far higher standard than ourselves, then Jesus has words of warning. We will be judged then by that standard on the final day. So what is it to be excessively critical? It's when the balance is, so Lady Justice holds balances. And she holds these balances that are equal. But when we are judgmental, excessively critical, these balances are not equal. They're tilted in my favor and against another person. It's like we use two different criminal systems when we look at others and when we look at ourselves. When we judge others, we can assume guilty until proven innocent. When we look at ourselves, we can assume innocent until proven guilty. That's the mindset of a judgmental person. That is what Paul is condemning here. And so again, this works itself out in Rome with the weak thinking, how can these people who are eating meat and drinking wine be accepted by God? We're judging them as if they're not accepted by God. How can they be a Christian? And Paul is saying, do not do that. Well, these are the things that fight against our welcoming one another. These vices, they hinder us. They're the roadblocks on us having open arms to receive one another, to welcome one another. And like any sin, when these things, they begin in our hearts and then they move to our attitudes towards someone and then they lash out in actions. And maybe right now they're just in our hearts. Praise God, it hasn't gotten any further, but that's a call to fight, to resist it as it's in our hearts. Put these things to death. Resist them. Resist despising one another. Resist being judgmental. And in its place, try to understand. This is the positive. Try to understand one another. This is what it is this is one step on the way to receiving a brother or sister, is when I pause long enough to try to understand them, to listen to them, to hear them. The goal is for us to try and understand as best as we can, though the other person with their different opinion may seem like a worldview away from me, to try to stand in their shoes and to understand what they're dealing with. That's the goal for the Christian in receiving one another. And here's what that might look like for us, just to put some close on what we've been saying here. It's for me to think, if I am of the more health concerned, if we want to put it that way, side, it's for me to think, what is it like to go Monday through Saturday as an unvaccinated brother or sister in this world? What's it like? Have I tried to stand in their shoes? As we hear the media and politicians saying crazy things about the unvaccinated that have no place being said, as these brothers and sisters are being restricted based on their conviction, being restricted from things that should be open, what's it like? Have I at least considered what it's like to fear the future like they do? As their kids' university future maybe has been thrown out the window, or as they're threatened to lose their job. Now, the point isn't they should just get the vaccine already. The point is, have I tried to understand? And if I try to understand, then maybe that helps me understand their actions. Not that I can agree with them, but understand them. And then on the other side, have I tried to understand what it's like to come to church masked on Sunday? Have I tried to understand my brother or sister who feel convicted to do that? And to as they come to worship God, they love to worship, they desire to worship God, and they come, and it's so hard because of these distractions, and both ways, of course, and yet they can feel that all week long they're living conscientiously according to their convictions in the world, serving the world, helping, caring for the community. Yet this is the one place where they feel all things have gone out the window. I'm not asking, do we agree with them, but do we understand? Have we tried to stand in their shoes to see that can be hard? I understand why that's difficult. When our hearts are in that place, trying to understand one another, we are one step closer to receiving one another. Not receiving their opinions and changing my own, but receiving the person. This is a person who God wants me to receive and to embrace. Well, one powerful means, how can we do this? How can we apply this more and more? One powerful means for resisting these vices is the judgment seat of Christ. Notice verse 10. You're saying, I want to resist despising. I want to resist judging. How can I do that? Verse 10, but why do you judge your brother? Why do you show contempt for your brother? Notice both words, despising, contempt. For we shall all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. And on that judgment day, we will not be accountable for what others did to me. God will not ask me, give an account for what others did to you, said to you, felt towards you. God will ask you and me, how did you respond? what did you do to others? That's verse 12. So then each of us shall give an account of himself to God. And so thinking about Christ's judgment seat keeps my eyes targeted on myself, to resist these devices, not to get my eyes straying, looking at my brother or sister and saying, they need to do this, they need to do that. But me, I want to resist when I need to resist, and the judgment seat of Christ helps me keep that focus. Well, finally, there's one other means, and that is our final point. Let's remember God's embrace. Let's remember God's embrace. Notice in our text, this takes us to the end of verse 3. And here is the great reason, we haven't yet given it yet, here's the great reason to welcome someone else. Not only does God command us to welcome one another, that's reason enough. Yet now God supplies us a reason. Notice, let not him who eats despise him who does not eat, and let not him who does not eat judge him who eats, for God has received him. The same word. God has welcomed this person. God has received him. This is the motivation. This is another means that we are to receive, that God is placing in our laps so we might move a step closer in receiving one another and fight harder in resisting our heart sins. It's by recognizing God has received them. This person that I'm rejecting and pushing away, God has received them. Am I holier than God? If he can receive them, and yet I'm setting up standards whereby I can't, am I holier than God? Remember God's embrace. God has welcomed them. God has embraced them. And so when we're tempted to reject them, we must remember this. But then also, Romans 15:7, not only has God welcomed them, Romans 15:7, therefore receive one another just as Christ also received us. Remember God's embrace. When I'm tempted to push this person away, I should think about God hasn't pushed me away. God has embraced me with all of my strange opinions. He has embraced me and called me his child. And that then is to be another means that gets in the way of me pushing a brother or sister away. And notice the key words, just as Christ also received us to the glory of God. So don't just remember God's embrace in a generic way, but remember God's embrace in Christ. Remember God's embrace as it comes through Christ's work. Remember God's embrace as it comes through the cross. That's the point. Paul makes that point in Romans 14, verse 9. In verse 10, he brings up the judgment, but in verse 9, he says, for to this end, Christ died and rose and lived again. And so Paul wants us to think about the cross. Just like New Year's Day, the Christian is to consciously live between the cross and the judgment seat. And these two things are to help me in every area of life. And in this case, then, to receive a brother or sister, as I'm tempted to push them away, I'm to think about, what did Jesus do? What did he suffer in order to receive me? What bloodshed did he go to giving? How many times did he have to put up with his disciples' crazy opinions? He had a group that was a band of misfits put together. They often couldn't see one mind, and yet there is Christ marching on the road to Jerusalem ahead of them to go and die for them, that he might receive them all. That's what I'm to see. To help me to receive a brother or sister who thinks differently than me. I'm to remember the cross, remember what Christ suffered, remember that he loves his church and gave himself for her. But then also remember what the cross has accomplished. Notice this. What has the cross accomplished? Well, it's through the cross that God has reconciled sinners who are believing in him to himself, but through the cross, God has reconciled his church to one another. You can read Ephesians 2. Jesus Christ has made peace. But we see it here in Romans 14. We see the effects of what the cross has accomplished in how many times Paul says the word brother. 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 Receive your brother. This is your brother. We're talking about your brother that you're rejecting. And so God is wanting us to live seeing one another as brothers and sisters. Don't just see one who disagrees with me on whatever the issue is, but see brother, sister. Yes, we don't think alike, but this is a brother, this is a sister. They're hurting. We don't agree on everything, but because of the situation, I need to put in the effort, to take the time, to feel their pain, to listen to them, and to respect them in spite of the disagreements. Well, brothers and sisters, in conclusion, we have work to do. Every church has work to do. Every Christian has work to do. Hard heart work to do. We have to receive one another. That's God's call. Receive one another. Unless you be discouraged and think, what's the use? What's the use? Unless we be tempted to think only Satan is at work in our day, disrupting the church. We need to know with certainty that God is ultimately ordering all things for the good of his people. And so even our own situation is for the good of his people, and he's calling his people to be teachable in this moment. To be teachable, and the thing that he's calling us to is to learn to receive one another. And oh, what good he will do. What gospel witness, what edification, what upbuilding, what glory to the name of God will happen as we receive one another. May God help us. Amen.